Two Filipino sisters received what seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime, a personal invitation to model at a billionaire Sheikh's private mansion in Dubai. They boarded that plane with dreams of fame and fortune, but what happened when they arrived will haunt you forever. This story will take you inside a world so twisted and evil that you'll question everything you think you know about online opportunities and the people behind them. Camila and Esperanza Valdez were sisters from the bustling streets of Manila, aged 22 and 20 respectively, working long shifts at a local electronics factory while sharing a tiny one-room apartment in Quezon City. Like millions of young Filipinas, they scrolled through Instagram every night, watching influencers live lives they could only dream of, posting photos from luxury hotels and designer shopping sprees that cost more than the sisters earned in a year. But what they didn't know was that someone was watching them too, studying their every post, their every comment, their every desperate wish for something better. Camila, the older sister, had always been the responsible one since their parents died in a typhoon 3 years earlier, leaving the girls with nothing but each other and a mountain of debt that seemed impossible to climb. She worked double shifts, her hands rough from assembling circuit boards, her back aching from 14-hour days, all so that Esperanza could finish her college degree in marketing. Esperanza was the dreamer, the one who believed that somehow, someday, they would escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped their family for generations. She had created an Instagram account where she posted amateur makeup tutorials and outfit combinations she put together from thrift store finds, gaining a modest following of about 2,000 people who loved her creativity and infectious smile. It was on a humid Tuesday evening in March 2016 when everything changed. Esperanza was scrolling through her phone after another exhausting day when a direct message notification popped up that made her heart skip a beat. The profile was verified with a blue check mark, belonging to something called Royal Emirates Talent Agency, and the profile picture showed a gleaming office overlooking the iconic Dubai skyline. The message was written in perfect English with occasional Filipino phrases that showed cultural awareness, immediately making it feel legitimate and personal. Dear Esperanza, we have been following your content for several months and are impressed by your natural beauty and authentic personality. Our agency represents high-profile clients in the Middle East, including members of royal families and successful businessmen. We would like to offer you an exclusive opportunity that could change your life forever. The message continued, explaining that Sheikh Khalil Al-Mansouri, described as a prominent Dubai businessman and philanthropist, was hosting a cultural appreciation event at his private estate and specifically requested young Filipino women to represent their country's beauty and grace at the gathering. The offer was staggering, $50,000 for 1 week of work, with all expenses paid, luxury accommodations, designer wardrobes provided, and the promise of future modeling opportunities with international brands. For context, this was more money than both sisters would earn combined in 5 years at the factory. But what made it even more enticing was the personal touch in the message. Sheikh Khalil has a deep appreciation for Filipino culture after spending time in the Philippines during his humanitarian work. He specifically chose you because of your authentic representation of Filipina beauty and intelligence. Esperanza screenshot the message and ran to show Camila, who was cooking their simple dinner of rice and canned sardines. Look at this, she said, using the Filipino term for older sister, her voice trembling with excitement. This could be our way out. Camila read the message carefully, her practical mind immediately searching for red flags. The grammar was perfect, the offer seemed too good to be true, but when they researched the agency, everything appeared legitimate. The website was professionally designed, filled with photos of glamorous events and testimonials from models who claimed to have worked with them. What the sisters didn't know was that every single element they were seeing had been carefully constructed by a criminal network that had perfected the art of deception over years of operation. The website was only 6 months old, the testimonials were from paid actors, and the photos of events were stolen from legitimate modeling agencies and digitally altered. The person behind the Royal Emirates Talent Agency profile wasn't even in Dubai. He was part of an international trafficking ring that specialized in targeting vulnerable young women from developing countries with promises of legitimate work opportunities. The sisters spent the next week researching everything they could about the opportunity. They found the agency's Facebook page with thousands of followers, LinkedIn profiles of supposed staff members, and even what appeared to be news articles about their successful events. Every piece of evidence seemed to confirm that this was real, that their prayers had finally been answered. The communication became more frequent and personal. Sarah Martinez, who identified herself as the agency's Filipino liaison, began video calling Esperanza daily. Sarah was an elegant woman in her 30s who spoke perfect Tagalog and claimed to be from Cebu originally but had been working in Dubai for 5 years. "I started just like you," Sarah told Esperanza during one of their video calls, showing her around what appeared to be a luxury office. "I was working in a call center in Makati, barely making ends meet. Sheikh Khalil's events changed everything for me. Now I help other Filipinas find the same opportunities." She showed photos of previous events, beautiful young women in elegant gowns standing next to traditionally dressed Arab men in opulent settings. "Sheikh Khalil is very respectful," Sarah emphasized. "He's married with children and sees these events as cultural exchange. You'll be treated like royalty." But here's where the story takes its first dark turn, though the sisters had no way of knowing it at the time. The elegant office Sarah was showing them was actually a rented co-working space that the traffickers used for a few hours at a time. The photos of previous events were carefully staged using local models who were paid to pose for what they thought were promotional photos. And Sarah Martinez wasn't even her real name. She was a former victim who had been forced to become a recruiter after years of abuse had broken her spirit completely. The agency's next move was brilliant in its psychological manipulation. Instead of immediately accepting Esperanza alone, they asked if she had any friends or family members who might also be interested. "Sheikh Khalil is particularly interested in showcasing family bonds and sisterhood in Filipino culture," Sarah explained. "If you have a sister or close friend who shares your beauty and grace, the compensation would double." This wasn't just about money, it was about making the offer feel more legitimate by including multiple people, and it was about isolating the victims by ensuring they were far from home with only each other for support. Camila had been skeptical from the beginning, but the prospect of $100,000 total was impossible to ignore. It would pay off all their debts, allow Esperanza to finish college and give them enough money to start a small business. More importantly, they would be together. "We'll look out for each other," Esperanza convinced her older sister. "And it's only 1 week. We can handle anything for 1 week if it means changing our lives forever." The paperwork process was extensive and professional, which only added to the illusion of legitimacy. They provided detailed contracts in both English and Filipino, had them sign multiple documents, and even arranged for medical examinations at a clinic in Manila that they claimed was required for international travel. The clinic was real, but it was owned by someone connected to the trafficking network, and the medical examinations were actually used to assess the girl's health and value to potential buyers. 3 weeks after that first message, Camila and Esperanza found themselves at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, each carrying a small suitcase as instructed. They had been told that an extensive wardrobe would be provided, so they should pack light. Their departure was scheduled for 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and as they hugged their aunt goodbye, the only family they had left, neither woman could have imagined that it would be the last time anyone in the Philippines would ever see them alive. But what happened next at the airport should have been their first warning that something was terribly wrong, and if you think this story is heartbreaking now, wait until you hear what Sheikh Khalil al-Mansuri was really planning for these innocent young women the moment their plane touched down in Dubai. The flight to Dubai was Camila and Esperanza's first time on an airplane, and the excitement temporarily overshadowed any lingering doubts they might have had. They were seated in economy class next to 2 other Filipino women who appeared to be around the same age. During the 7-hour flight, the sisters discovered that Maria Santos, 21, and Isabella Cruz, 23, were also heading to work for the same agency. Maria was from Davao and had been recruited through a similar Instagram approach, while Isabella was from Iloilo and had been contacted through Facebook. The 4 young women bonded quickly during the flight, sharing their stories and dreams about what this opportunity would mean for their families back home. Maria had 3 younger siblings she was supporting after her father became disabled in a construction accident. Isabella was the eldest of 6 children and had been working as a waitress while studying nursing part-time. As they compared their recruitment experiences, the similarities were striking. All had been contacted through social media, all had been promised the same astronomical sum of money, and all had been told they were specifically chosen for their authentic Filipino beauty and cultural representation. What none of them realized was that they were comparing notes on a carefully orchestrated system that had been refined over years of operation. The traffickers had learned that recruiting groups of women from the same country created a false sense of security and made the victims less likely to suspect danger. These 4 young women represented months of careful selection, psychological profiling, and manipulation designed to identify the most vulnerable targets, women with financial desperation, family obligations, and dreams big enough to override their natural caution. When their Emirates flight touched down at Dubai International Airport at 6:30 a.m. local time, the sisters felt a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. The airport was unlike anything they had ever seen: gleaming marble floors, towering ceilings, and luxury shops that seemed to sell items worth more than their family's annual income. As they made their way through immigration, each woman presented the invitation letters that Sarah Martinez had provided, along with their passports and return tickets dated exactly 1 week later. The immigration officer, a stern-looking Emirati man in his 40s, examined Esperanza's documents with unusual care. He looked at her passport photo, then at her face, then back at the invitation letter. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, he stared at his computer screen, typing something that made his expression grow increasingly concerned. "Purpose of visit?" he asked in accented English, though the invitation letter clearly stated cultural modeling work. "Modeling work," Esperanza replied, showing him the letter again. The officer's eyes met hers, and for just a moment she thought she saw something that looked almost like pity. He stamped her passport harder than necessary and handed it back to her without another word. Later, investigators would discover that this particular immigration officer had tried to flag suspicious invitations in the past, but his reports had been buried by officials who were receiving payments to look the other way. In the arrivals area, the 4 women looked around nervously for someone holding a sign with their names. The bustling terminal was filled with families reuniting, business travelers rushing to catch connections, and tourists beginning their Dubai adventures. But there was no sign of anyone from Royal Emirates Talent Agency. After waiting for 30 minutes, Isabella suggested they call the emergency number Sarah had provided. The phone rang several times before a man answered with a heavy Arabic accent. "Yes, hello, we are here for pickup," Esperanza said carefully. "We are the Filipino models for Sheikh Khalil's event." There was a long pause, during which they could hear the man speaking to someone else in Arabic. "Ah yes," he finally said. There was delay. "Wait outside Terminal 3, parking level 2. Black van will come." Something about his tone made Camila's stomach tighten, but they had come too far to turn back now. The 4 women made their way to the designated area, dragging their small suitcases behind them. Dubai's morning heat was already intense, and they found themselves sweating in their travel clothes as they waited in the concrete parking garage. 20 minutes later, a black van with heavily tinted windows pulled up beside them. The driver was a large Pakistani man who looked to be in his 50s, with calloused hands and eyes that never quite met theirs. He spoke minimal English and didn't smile when he asked for their passports. "For hotel registration," he explained when they hesitated. "Standard procedure." One by one, they handed over their most important documents, watching as he locked them in a metal box bolted to the van's dashboard. The drive from the airport should have taken 45 minutes according to the GPS on Isabella's phone, but after an hour and a half, they were clearly heading away from Dubai's city center. The gleaming skyscrapers had given way to construction sites, then to empty desert dotted with half-finished developments. When Maria asked where they were going, the driver simply said, "Sheikh's private estate. Very exclusive. Very secure." The van finally stopped at a massive gate set into a concrete wall that stretched as far as they could see in either direction. Armed guards in military-style uniforms checked the driver's identification before allowing them to enter. As they drove through the compound, the women saw what appeared to be a luxurious estate, manicured gardens, fountains, and a sprawling villa that looked like something from a movie. For a moment, their fears began to subside. This looked exactly like the kind of place where a wealthy sheikh might host cultural events. But as they approached the main building, subtle details began to register in their minds. The windows had bars disguised as decorative metalwork. The beautiful gardens were surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire. And there were security cameras everywhere, pointing not outward to protect against intruders, but inward, watching every inch of the property with mechanical precision. The van stopped at a side entrance, not the grand front door they had expected. A woman emerged from the building, thin, Middle Eastern, wearing a black abaya that covered everything except her eyes. She gestured for them to follow her without speaking a word. As they climbed out of the van, each carrying their small suitcase, the woman who had greeted them noticed Isabella trying to take a photo of the impressive building with her phone. "No phones," the woman said sharply in accented English, holding out her hand. "Security policy. Very strict." When Isabella hesitated, the woman's voice became harder. "Give phones now or you cannot stay." The four friends looked at each other uncertainly. This hadn't been mentioned in any of their conversations with Sarah Martinez. But they were in a foreign country, completely dependent on these people, and they had already come so far. Reluctantly, each woman handed over her phone, watching as their only connection to the outside world disappeared into a black bag that the woman immediately locked in a safe built into the wall. "You get back when you leave," she said, but something in her tone suggested she didn't believe her own words. They were led through corridors that were far more sterile than luxurious, past doors that had locks on the outside rather than the inside, and finally to a wing of the building that felt more like institutional housing than guest quarters. Each woman was assigned to a different room, small, windowless spaces with a single bed, a small dresser, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. When Camila tried to follow Esperanza to her room, the woman in black stepped between them. "Separate rooms," she said firmly. "House rules. No visiting between rooms." The doors closed with a sound that made their hearts sink, the unmistakable click of electronic locks engaging from the outside. They were prisoners, though they wouldn't fully understand that reality for several more hours. And that's just the beginning of this nightmare, because what I'm about to tell you next will show you the true horror of what Sheikh Khalil al-Mansuri had planned for these four innocent young women, and why their families back in the Philippines would spend years searching for answers that would never come. Alone in her cell-like room, Esperanza sat on the edge of the narrow bed and tried to process what was happening. The excitement and anticipation she had felt just hours earlier had been replaced by a growing dread that settled in her stomach like ice water. The room had no windows, just fluorescent lighting that hummed constantly and gave everything a sickly greenish tint. There was no phone, no way to communicate with her sister just meters away, and no way to contact anyone in the outside world. After what felt like hours but was probably only one, the electronic lock clicked open and the woman in black entered carrying a tray of food and a bottle of water. The meal was simple: rice, some kind of meat stew, and flatbread, but Esperanza found she had no appetite. "When do we meet Sheikh Khalil?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "When does the cultural event begin?" The woman's laugh was cold and humorless. "Soon," she said in a way that made Esperanza's skin crawl. "First you rest, then you prepare. Sheikh Khalil is very particular about presentation." She set the tray down and moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Eat," she commanded. "You need strength for what comes next." The door closed again with that terrifying electronic click, leaving Esperanza alone with her fears and 1,000 questions that no one would answer. She picked at the food mechanically, her mind racing through possible explanations for everything that had happened since they landed. Maybe this was just how wealthy people operated in Dubai. Maybe the security measures were normal for someone of Sheikh Khalil's status. Maybe the separate rooms and locked doors were just precautions to protect his privacy and theirs. But deep in her heart, she knew something was terribly wrong. The woman's eyes when she looked at them hadn't shown respect or professional courtesy, they had shown the cold assessment of someone evaluating merchandise. The way the guards had watched them wasn't like security protecting VIP guests. It was like wardens watching prisoners. And the building itself, despite its superficial luxury, had the unmistakable feel of a place designed to keep people in rather than welcome them. In her own room 2 doors down, Camila was coming to the same horrifying realization. As the older sister, she had always been the protector, the one who made sure Esperanza was safe and cared for. Now, for the first time in her life, she was completely powerless to help her little sister, locked away and isolated with no way to even communicate with her. The guilt was crushing. She should have trusted her instincts, should have said no to this opportunity no matter how much money was involved, should have kept them both safe in their tiny Manila apartment where they were poor but free. Meanwhile, in a luxurious office on the other side of the compound, the man they knew as Sheikh Khalil al-Mansuri was reviewing photos and profiles of his newest acquisitions with a clinical detachment of someone examining livestock. His real name was Hassan al-Qureshi, and he wasn't a sheikh at all. He was a former military contractor who had discovered that human trafficking was far more profitable than any legitimate business he had ever attempted. The luxurious compound wasn't his estate, it was a sophisticated prison designed specifically for breaking the spirits of young women before they were sold to the highest bidders across the Middle East and North Africa. The cultural events he hosted were actually private auctions where wealthy men bid on women like they were pieces of art. Hassan studied the photos of Camila and Esperanza with particular interest. The Filipino market was especially valuable because of the women's reputation for being gentle, hardworking, and less likely to attempt escape than women from other countries. The sisters represented a premium product, young, beautiful, educated enough to be interesting but desperate enough to be controllable. Their close bond would make them even more valuable to certain buyers who enjoyed the psychological torture of separating families. The older one has fire in her eyes, Hassan said to his lieutenant, Mahmoud, a Lebanese man who had been running trafficking operations across 3 countries for over a decade. She'll need more breaking than the younger one. He pointed at Esperanza's photo. This one is already broken by poverty and hope. She'll be easier to train. What Hassan called training was a systematic process of psychological and physical abuse designed to destroy every trace of independence and self-worth in his victims. The process typically took 2 to 3 weeks, after which even the strongest-willed women would do anything to avoid further punishment. The compound housed specialized rooms for this purpose, soundproof chambers where screams couldn't be heard, medical facilities where injuries could be treated without leaving permanent visible scars, and isolation cells where women could be left in complete darkness until their sanity began to fracture. The 4 Filipino women had no way of knowing that they were just the latest in a conveyor belt of human misery that had been operating for over 5 years. In a filing cabinet in Hassan's office were the documents of over 300 women who had passed through his compound, their original identification papers, medical records, and detailed notes about their psychological breaking points and eventual sales prices. Some had been sold to wealthy individuals as personal slaves. Others had been sent to brothels in countries where their disappearance would never be investigated. A few had simply disappeared when they became too troublesome or damaged to be profitable. As evening approached on their first day in captivity, the 4 women were given what they were told would be their uniforms for the cultural event. Each received a bag containing makeup, hairstyling products, and an outfit that made their blood run cold. The clothes weren't the elegant evening gowns they had been promised, they were revealing costume versions of traditional Filipino dress, designed to sexualize and objectify rather than honor their culture. Maria was the first to refuse. When the woman in black returned to collect their measurements, Maria threw the costume on the floor and announced that she wanted to leave immediately. "This isn't what we agreed to," she said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "Take us back to the airport right now. We're going home." The woman's reaction was swift and brutal. She pressed a button on a device she carried, and within seconds 2 large men entered the room. Without a word, they grabbed Maria by her arms and dragged her from the room as she screamed for help. Esperanza, Camila, and Isabella could hear her cries echoing through the corridors until they suddenly stopped with a sickening finality. Maria learned the first rule, the woman announced when she returned an hour later, her hands now stained with something dark. "There is no leaving. There is no going home. There is only obedience or punishment. Which do you choose?" The psychological impact was devastating and immediate. These young women had never experienced violence or genuine threats to their lives. The sudden disappearance of their friend shattered any remaining illusions about their situation and planted a terror so deep that rational thought became nearly impossible. The woman's blood-stained hands made it clear that Maria's punishment had been severe, possibly fatal. That night, none of them slept. Esperanza lay curled on her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the compound, footsteps in corridors, doors slamming, and occasionally muffled sounds that could have been crying or screaming from somewhere deep in the building. Every sound made her flinch, expecting the door to open and the men to come for her next. In the morning they were given a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Hassan himself appeared for the first time, dressed in an expensive white dishdasha with gold accessories that proclaimed his wealth. He was smaller than they had expected, perhaps 5 feet 6 inches tall, with soft hands that had never done manual labor and cold eyes that seemed to look through them rather than at them. His English was perfect, with a slight British accent that suggested expensive education. "Ladies," he said with mock politeness, "I apologize for the confusion yesterday. My staff sometimes over-communicate the security measures. Let me explain your situation clearly. He smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "You are here to provide entertainment for very important men. Men who have paid considerable money for the privilege of your company. You can choose to cooperate and be treated well, or you can choose to resist and suffer the consequences." Isabella, who had remained quiet since Maria's disappearance, finally found her voice. "Where is Maria? What did you do to her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Hassan's smile widened. "Maria chose resistance," he said simply. "She is learning the cost of that choice in our medical wing. She will recover, eventually, but she will never again make the mistake of thinking she has options." He walked closer to Isabella, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something else, something that reminded her of hospitals and antiseptic. "Would you like to visit her? To see what resistance looks like?" Isabella shook her head quickly, stepping backward until she hit the wall. Hassan's soft laugh filled the room like poison. "Wise choice. Now, let me explain what cooperation looks like." But what Hassan revealed next about his plans for these innocent young women would prove that the nightmare they thought they were living was actually just the beginning, and the entertainment he had planned would shock you to your core. The cultural event, Hassan explained, was scheduled for that evening. It would be attended by 12 of his most valued clients, men from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Egypt, and other countries who shared his particular interests. These weren't desperate criminals or obvious predators. They were successful businessmen, government officials, and members of prominent families who could afford to pay premium prices for experiences that were illegal in most of the civilized world. "You will be presented as authentic Filipino cultural ambassadors," Hassan continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a business proposition. "You will wear traditional dress, perform traditional dances, and demonstrate traditional hospitality. My clients appreciate cultural authenticity in their entertainment." The way he said the word entertainment made it clear that culture had nothing to do with what he was really selling. Each woman would be assigned to a specific client for the evening. Their job was to be charming, submissive, and accommodating to whatever requests were made. "Think of yourselves as very expensive hostesses," Hassan said. "Your role is to ensure that my clients have an unforgettable experience." Camila, who had been silent throughout the explanation, finally spoke up. "And if we refuse?" Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Hassan's eyes fixed on her with interest, as if he was seeing her for the first time. "Ah, the protective older sister," he said. "I was wondering when you would reveal yourself." He walked over to where she stood and circled her slowly, like a predator examining prey. "Refusal is not an option that exists in my vocabulary. But resistance can be accommodated. Some of my clients actually prefer it. They find it adds excitement to the experience." The implication was clear and horrifying. Whether they cooperated or resisted, they would be used for the entertainment of these men. The only difference was whether they would suffer additional torture for trying to maintain their dignity. Hassan continued his explanation with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Each client had paid $50,000 for their evening's entertainment. The women's cooperation would determine whether they survived the experience intact enough to be useful for future events. "I have invested considerable resources in acquiring you," he said. "I expect a return on that investment." As the day progressed, the 3 remaining women were subjected to what Hassan called preparation. They were forced to shower under the supervision of armed guards, had their hair and makeup done by women who worked with the efficiency of morticians preparing bodies, and were dressed in the costume versions of traditional Filipino clothing that had been tailored to be as revealing as possible while maintaining the pretense of cultural authenticity. The most psychologically devastating part of the preparation was the drugging. Each woman was given what they were told were vitamins but were actually a combination of mild sedatives and substances designed to make them more compliant and less likely to remember details of what happened to them. The drugs didn't render them unconscious. Hassan's clients preferred their victims to be aware of what was happening, but they created a dreamlike state where resistance became nearly impossible. As evening approached, the sounds of arriving vehicles could be heard outside. Expensive cars with diplomatic plates pulled through the compound's gates, delivering men in traditional Arabic dress who laughed and spoke excitedly about the evening's entertainment. These were not desperate or obviously criminal men. They were the elite of Middle Eastern society, men with families and businesses and reputations that would never be questioned. The main hall of the compound had been transformed into an opulent dining room with low tables, cushions, and lighting designed to create an intimate atmosphere. Traditional Arabic music played softly in the background, and the smell of expensive food filled the air. To any outside observer, it would have looked like an elegant cultural exchange dinner. Hassan's final instructions to the women were delivered with the clinical precision of a military briefing. They would enter the dining room at precisely 8 p.m., perform a traditional Filipino dance that had been choreographed to highlight their physical attributes, and then join the clients for dinner. After dinner, each woman would accompany her assigned client to private quarters for what Hassan euphemistically called cultural discussion. "Remember," he said as they waited in a holding room adjacent to the dining hall, "your families back in the Philippines believe you are living a dream. Whether that dream becomes a nightmare depends entirely on your cooperation tonight. And if you think this story couldn't get any worse, what happened next in that dining room would reveal the true depths of human evil and show these young women that their nightmare was only just beginning." At exactly 8 p.m., the door to the holding room opened and Hassan appeared, now dressed in an even more elaborate traditional outfit that proclaimed his status as host. Behind him stood two guards carrying what appeared to be decorative chains but were actually restraints disguised as jewelry. "It's time for your debut," he announced with the enthusiasm of a theater director preparing for opening night. The three women were led into the dining hall, and the sight that greeted them was worse than anything they could have imagined. 12 men sat around the low tables, their eyes following every movement with the hungry anticipation of predators sizing up prey. These weren't the rough criminals the women might have expected. They were elegantly dressed, well-groomed men who looked like they could have been their fathers or uncles. Their respectability made their presence at this gathering even more chilling. The youngest client appeared to be in his 40s, while the oldest looked to be approaching 70. They wore expensive watches, traditional robes made from the finest fabrics, and carried themselves with the confidence of men who had never been told no in their entire lives. As the women entered, conversations stopped and all attention focused on them with an intensity that made their skin crawl. "Gentlemen," Hassan announced in Arabic, then switched to English for the benefit of his victims, "may I present our cultural ambassadors from the Philippines." He gestured toward each woman in turn. "Camila, our mature beauty who understands the value of family loyalty. Esperanza, our innocent flower who dreams of a better world. And Isabella, our educated sophisticate who appreciates the finer things in life." The way he described them made it clear that he had studied their personalities and backgrounds to market them more effectively to his clients. Each description was designed to appeal to specific preferences among the buyers. The men nodded appreciatively, and several made comments in Arabic that caused others to laugh in ways that made the women's blood run cold. The forced cultural performance that followed was a grotesque parody of Filipino tradition. The women were made to perform a version of the tinikling dance, but the traditional bamboo poles had been replaced with chains, and their movements were choreographed to be provocative rather than culturally authentic. As they danced, the men called out encouragement in Arabic and English, treating them like performers in a strip club rather than cultural ambassadors. Esperanza stumbled during the dance, her drugged state making coordination difficult, and immediately feared punishment. But Hassan simply smiled and announced that her clumsiness was charming, part of her innocent appeal. The comment drew appreciative murmurs from several clients, and she realized with horror that even her mistakes were being used to make her more attractive to these predators. When the dance ended, the women were directed to sit beside their assigned clients for dinner. Camila found herself next to a heavy-set Saudi businessman who introduced himself as Mr. Al-Sabah and immediately began touching her arm and shoulder as if he owned her. Esperanza was seated beside a thin Egyptian man who looked to be in his 60s and spoke to her in broken English about how much he appreciated young Filipino hospitality. Isabella was assigned to a Kuwaiti official who spent dinner taking photos of her with his phone despite her obvious discomfort. The dinner conversation was surreal in its normalcy. These men discussed business deals, family vacations, and political developments while treating the women beside them like living accessories. They fed them food by hand, poured wine despite the women's attempts to refuse, and spoke about them in the third person as if they weren't present. "This one has such soft skin," Mr. Al-Sabah commented to Hassan while stroking Camila's arm. "Filipino women age so gracefully." As the evening progressed, the drugs in their systems made everything feel dreamlike and disconnected. The women found themselves struggling to form coherent thoughts or plan any kind of resistance. When Esperanza tried to stand up to use the bathroom, her legs nearly gave out, and the Egyptian man had to steady her with hands that lingered longer than necessary on her waist. "The preparation is working perfectly," Hassan observed to one of his guards in Arabic, not realizing that Isabella had studied the language in college and could understand every word. "They're compliant but still conscious enough to be interesting." The revelation that they had been deliberately drugged hit Isabella like a physical blow, but in her altered state, she found herself unable to process the information or act on it. Her mind felt wrapped in cotton, her thoughts moving like thick syrup. She tried to warn the others, but when she attempted to speak, only confused mumbles came out, which her assigned client found amusing. As dinner wound down, Hassan stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To cultural exchange," he announced, his words dripping with mockery. "And to new experiences that will broaden all of our horizons." The men laughed and drank, while the women sat in drugged confusion, still not fully comprehending what was about to happen to them. The transition from dinner to the private quarters happened with military precision. Each client was escorted to a different wing of the compound, accompanied by their assigned woman and several guards. The hallways they walked through were lined with doors that had heavy locks and soundproof padding, making it clear that the rooms beyond were designed to contain whatever happened inside them. Camila was led to a room decorated to look like a luxury hotel suite, complete with a king-sized bed, expensive furniture, and soft lighting that would have been romantic in any other context. Mr. Al-Sabah dismissed the guards and locked the door behind them, the sound of the lock engaging echoing in the silence like a death sentence. "Now we can get to know each other properly," he said in English, his voice taking on a different tone now that they were alone. The polite businessman from dinner was gone, replaced by something predatory and hungry. He began removing his traditional robes, revealing expensive Western clothing underneath. "Hassan tells me you have never been with an Arab man before. I will teach you to appreciate our customs." In another room, Esperanza found herself facing the thin Egyptian man in a space that looked more like a medical examination room than a bedroom. There were restraints built into the furniture, cameras mounted in corners, and medical equipment that suggested the room was designed for activities that might require immediate medical intervention. "Do not be afraid, little flower," the man said in his broken English as he began laying out various items on a table beside the bed. "I am very experienced with Filipino girls. I know exactly how to help you understand your new purpose in life." Meanwhile, Isabella was in a room with her Kuwaiti client that had been decorated to look like a traditional Arabic tent, complete with Middle Eastern carpets and music. But the illusion was ruined by the presence of recording equipment and lighting that made it clear this was being filmed for future enjoyment or possible blackmail. "You studied Arabic in university," the man said in perfect English, startling her with his knowledge of her background. "Hassan provides very detailed information about his acquisitions. This will make our communication much more intimate." But what these monsters didn't know was that their perfect evening of cultural entertainment was about to be interrupted by something they never saw coming, and the events of the next few hours would determine whether these brave young women would ever see their homeland again. Back in the compound's medical wing, Maria Santos was not dead as Hassan had implied. She was alive, but barely recognizable as the cheerful young woman who had boarded the plane in Manila just 24 hours earlier. Her refusal to cooperate had resulted in a systematic beating that left her with broken ribs, a fractured orbital bone, and internal injuries that the compound's doctor had treated with the minimum care necessary to keep her alive. But Maria's spirit wasn't broken. Despite the pain and trauma, she had spent the day observing the compound's security patterns, noting the changing of guards, and looking for any possible weakness in their prison. She had also discovered something that Hassan didn't know she knew: the location of the main communications room where all the compound's phone lines and internet connections were controlled. During her beating, she had been dragged past this room and had seen through the partially open door that it contained not just communication equipment, but also the master controls for the compound's electronic lock system. If she could reach that room, she might be able to unlock all the doors and contact the outside world simultaneously. The guards assigned to watch Maria had grown complacent, assuming that her injuries would keep her immobilized. They didn't know that she had been a competitive swimmer in high school and had learned to push through pain that would cripple most people. They also didn't know that her seemingly delirious mumblings were actually her mentally mapping the compound's layout and planning an escape route. As the evening's entertainment reached its most horrific phase in the private rooms, Maria was slowly working herself free from the restraints that held her to the medical bed. The guards had used standard zip ties, assuming that her injured state would prevent any escape attempt. But Maria had small hands and had discovered that the swelling from her injuries actually made her wrists smaller than when the restraints had been applied. The pain of pulling her hands free was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the rage that burned inside her when she thought about what was happening to her three friends at that very moment. Every sound of suffering that echoed through the compound's hallways gave her strength to endure another moment of agony as she worked herself free. In the private rooms, the true horror of Hassan's operation was being revealed to his victims in ways that would scar them forever, if they survived the night. The cultural entertainment had been nothing but a prelude to systematic assault that was being recorded for future sale to an even wider network of predators around the world. By 11 p.m., Maria had freed herself from the restraints and was moving through the compound service corridors with the stealth of someone fighting for her life. Every step sent waves of pain through her broken ribs, but she forced herself to keep moving. The sounds coming from the private rooms fueled her determination. She could hear her friends crying out, and she knew that every second she delayed meant more suffering for Camila, Esperanza, and Isabella. The communications room was located in the compound's administrative wing, 2 floors below the private entertainment suites. Maria had memorized the route during her brief glimpse earlier, but navigating the darkened corridors while injured proved more challenging than she had anticipated. The compound's layout was deliberately confusing, designed to prevent exactly what she was attempting. As she reached the stairwell leading to the communications room, Maria heard footsteps approaching. She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath as one of Hassan's guards walked past, talking on his radio in Arabic. From her hiding place, she could hear him reporting that all clients were satisfied with their entertainment and that the evening was proceeding according to plan. The communications room door was locked, but Maria had noticed during her earlier glimpse that it used an older mechanical lock rather than the electronic systems used throughout the rest of the compound. Using a hairpin she had salvaged from the medical room, she worked at the lock with skills learned during a troubled adolescence in Davos slums. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she heard the satisfying click of the mechanism giving way. Inside the communications room, Maria was confronted with a wall of electronic equipment that looked impossibly complex. But among the Arabic labels and technical displays, she spotted something that made her heart race with hope: a satellite phone clearly marked for emergency use. Her hands shaking with pain and adrenaline, she powered on the device and dialed the number for the Philippine embassy in Abu Dhabi that she had memorized before leaving Manila. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before a sleepy voice answered in Filipino. "Embassy duty officer, how can I help you?" Maria had never heard sweeter words in her life. "This is Maria Santos from Davao," she whispered urgently. "I'm a Filipino citizen being held against my will at a compound outside Dubai. There are 4 of us. We were trafficked here under false pretenses. They're hurting my friends right now. You have to send help immediately." The duty officer's voice instantly became alert and professional. "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm and give me as much information as possible. Do you know your location?" Maria quickly relayed everything she could remember about their journey from the airport, the compound's appearance, and Hassan's operation. As she spoke, she was simultaneously working at the electronic lock controls, trying to figure out how to open the doors throughout the facility. "Ma'am, I'm contacting Dubai Police and Interpol immediately," the duty officer said. "Can you stay on the line?" "I have to try to help my friends," Maria whispered. "They're being hurt right now. If I don't come back to this phone, tell my family I love them." Before the officer could respond, Maria had found what she was looking for, a master override button labeled in both Arabic and English. She pressed it, and throughout the compound she heard the simultaneous clicking of dozens of electronic locks disengaging. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Emergency alarms began blaring, red lights flashed in the corridors, and she could hear shouting in Arabic as guards rushed to understand what was happening. But more importantly, she could hear doors opening and confused voices as other captive women who had been held in different parts of the compound began emerging from their prison cells. Maria grabbed the satellite phone and began moving toward the entertainment wing, following the sounds of her friends' voices. The compound's corridors were now filled with armed guards running in different directions, their carefully planned evening of entertainment having devolved into complete chaos. In the private room where Camila was being held, the sudden opening of the locked door confused both victim and perpetrator. Mr. Al-Sabah, who had been in the process of assaulting her, looked around in bewilderment as alarms blared and red lights flashed. "What is happening?" he demanded in English, as if Camila would somehow know the answer. The confusion gave Camila the opportunity she needed. Despite the drugs in her system, her protective instincts toward Esperanza gave her a clarity and strength she didn't know she possessed. She grabbed a heavy lamp from the nightstand and struck her attacker with enough force to knock him unconscious. As she stumbled from the room, she could hear similar sounds of chaos coming from the other private quarters. Esperanza managed to escape her room when the electronic locks disengaged, running into the corridor despite her drugged state and inadequate clothing. The thin Egyptian man pursued her briefly but gave up when he encountered armed guards who were more concerned with securing the perimeter than catching one disoriented victim. Isabella, whose knowledge of Arabic had allowed her to understand more of what was happening around her, had been waiting for any opportunity to escape. When the doors opened and alarms began sounding, she immediately began shouting in Arabic that the police were coming, creating additional panic among the guards and clients. The four friends found each other in the main corridor, a reunion that was both joyful and heartbreaking. Maria was barely standing, her face swollen and bruised beyond recognition. Camila, Esperanza, and Isabella were in shock, their evening of horror written clearly on their faces despite their courage in escaping. "The Philippine embassy is sending help," Maria gasped as they supported each other. "But we need to get out of the compound before Hassan realizes what's happening." The sound of helicopters approaching could already be heard in the distance, but Hassan had not built his operation without contingency plans. As the women made their way toward what they hoped was an exit, they encountered the compound's owner himself, now armed with a pistol and flanked by his most trusted guards. "You have caused me considerable inconvenience," Hassan said with the same calm tone he had used earlier, as if discussing a minor business setback rather than the collapse of his criminal empire. "But perhaps this presents an opportunity to demonstrate to future acquisitions the consequences of resistance." The standoff lasted only seconds before the compound's main gates exploded inward under the impact of armored vehicles bearing the insignia of Dubai Police's elite anti-trafficking unit. The Philippine embassy's call had reached exactly the right people, a joint task force that had been investigating Hassan's operation for months without being able to locate his compound. In the chaos that followed, Hassan and several of his men were killed in a firefight with police, while others were captured alive. The 12 clients who had paid for their evening of cultural entertainment found themselves in handcuffs, their diplomatic immunity and social status unable to protect them from the evidence of their crimes that was recorded throughout the compound. The 4 Filipino women were rushed to a secure medical facility in Dubai, where they received treatment for their physical injuries and began the long process of psychological recovery. The Philippine government, embarrassed by the international attention the case received, provided them with comprehensive support and counseling services. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of Hassan's operation. Over the 5 years he had been active, his network had trafficked more than 400 young women from the Philippines, Thailand, Ethiopia, and other developing countries. Many were never found, their fates unknown. The compound contained detailed records of sales to clients across the Middle East and North Africa, leading to arrests in 7 countries. The 4 survivors became reluctant heroes in the fight against human trafficking, their courage in escaping and exposing Hassan's operation saving countless other potential victims. But the psychological scars of their ordeal would remain with them forever, a reminder of how quickly dreams of a better life could become unimaginable nightmares. Maria's quick thinking and refusal to give up even after being brutally beaten had saved not only her own life but the lives of her 3 friends and dozens of other women who were being held in different parts of the compound. Her actions proved that sometimes the difference between becoming a statistic and becoming a survivor comes down to a single moment of courage when everything seems hopeless. The case also revealed the sophisticated nature of modern human trafficking operations, which use social media, professional websites, and carefully crafted personas to target vulnerable young women around the world. The Royal Emirates Talent Agency's online presence had been so convincing that even experienced investigators admitted they might have been fooled by the deception. Today, Camila and Esperanza have returned to the Philippines, where they work with anti-trafficking organizations to educate young women about the warning signs of trafficking recruitment. Maria became a nurse and specializes in treating trauma victims, while Isabella completed her degree and now works for an international organization that combats human trafficking. Their story serves as both a warning and an inspiration, a reminder that predators are constantly evolving their tactics to exploit human dreams and desperation, but also proof that the human spirit can survive even the most horrific circumstances. The courage they showed in the darkest moments of their lives continues to provide hope for other victims who find themselves trapped in similar situations. The compound that once housed Hassan's operation has been demolished, but the memories of what happened there serve as a permanent reminder of the price of vigilance in protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. This story isn't just about 4 brave young women who survived an unimaginable ordeal. It's about the thousands of others who disappear every year into the shadows of human trafficking, and the urgent need for all of us to remain aware of the signs and support the organizations working to stop these crimes. If this story moved you and opened your eyes to the reality of human trafficking happening around the world every day, please like this video and subscribe to stay informed about these important issues that affect millions of innocent people. Together we can help prevent more families from experiencing the nightmare that Camila, Esperanza, Maria, and Isabella lived through, and ensure that their courage in speaking out continues to save lives for years to come.